Let's talk about some quarterback busts for the 2023 football season. Jeff, start us off here.
Aaron Rodgers is my quarterback bust. He was quarterback 22 last year, and he only got older. So he's a year older. He's moving into the Jets. He's moving into a new offensive structure, completely new environment. And so I think there was only 2 weeks last year where he was a quarterback one. He does not have any rushing floor, but he's coming off the board as quarterback 15 in underdog drafts right now. And I think a lot of that is tied up into the production over the last couple of years before that, when he did have Devontae Adams, and then also just kind of the excitement around going to the Jets. But we've seen the Jets. That's the quarterback graveyard where quarterbacks go to die once they go to New York. And so we saw Brett Favre make a similar move, struggle for a year before he landed in Minnesota, had a little bit of a bounce back there. But all time, Aaron Rodgers has had 6 different seasons where he's beaten Ryan Fitzpatrick, franchise record 31 touchdowns in a season, and 9 different seasons where he's beaten Joe Namath 4,007 yards as a quarterback for a single season passing yards. And so Aaron Rodgers is stepping in as potentially statistically the best quarterback all time for the Jets, but at that age with an offense that I think they want to run the ball, and then some questions about where his performance is coming off last year, it's just not a quarterback to buy into.
Yeah. So it's also a very different situation than we've ever seen Aaron Rodgers in. I mean, during his entire time in Green Bay, they took this very homegrown approach. I mean, they were never active in free agency. They would develop these receivers slowly over time. This actually blew my mind, and I was writing up an Aaron Rodgers piece earlier this offseason, but no wide receiver who has ever played with Aaron Rodgers has logged 1,000 or more yards within their first 3 years together. That's Devontae Adams, Jordy Nelson, Randall Cobb, all these prolific receivers we think of as Aaron Rodgers' favorite weapons, took until year 4 to finally eclipse 1,000 yards, and that's just kind of what he'd do with his guys. And we saw it last year with Allen Lazard stepping up into the wide receiver 1 role after 4 years of kind of earning that trust and chemistry with Aaron Rodgers. Now he's going into a system where he has a couple old friends in Allen Lazard and Randall Cobb that are going to help him out, but he also has a lot of new weapons that he is going to have just one offseason to develop chemistry with. So either you can answer here, Joey or Jeff, is that something that concerns you at all, that he just might not be able to instantly build that unconscious chemistry that he's displayed with some of his other receivers?
It just makes me wonder if the 2 guys they brought in are safety blankets for him. If Allen Lazard and Randall Cobb, or that's what they're going to serve for until he builds that rapport with Wilson. But like you pointed out, it takes 3 seasons to get on the same page with Rodgers. And I don't even know if Rodgers is going to be there for 3 years. So he might not get on the same page with Wilson. Wilson's extremely talented, but the question marks are there.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the weirdest guys to talk about is Garrett Wilson, because if he starts getting Devontae Adams type of target share, he's looking at a possible overall wide receiver 1 type of outcome. But if and this is crazy to even talk about, but if Aaron Rodgers says, I'm just going to keep looking at my guys, Lazard and Randall Cobb, and Garrett Wilson is kind of, I don't want to say the number 3 option, but you guys get where I'm getting at. He's not going to pull that elite target share. We could be looking at a very shaky floor for Garrett Wilson. Jeff, what do you think about this?
Garrett Wilson, I think, is, I understand the shaky floor, but I think if they do a lot of what they did with Devontae Adams, involving Garrett Wilson in the screen game, getting those targets up, I think the volume could be there, and we saw the Wilson produce immediately. Wilson's that type of player that he can attack vertically, he can work in the screen game, he can work in the intermediary, he can do anything you want him to do, and so being that primary receiving option and having players around him, Allen Lazard is a very scheme-specific, role-specific player, and Mecole Hardman is a role-specific player, and Randall Cobb, good Lord, I hope Randall Cobb is not taking some volume on this offense. But I think my bigger concern on Aaron Rodgers' role and the Jets and what they want to do, Robert Saleh being a defensive first head coach, and we've seen great development from the defense there, coming over from the San Francisco system where they're not having Kyle Shanahan run the offense. We know the big play explosion capability in that 49ers offense, but I think this team wants to run the ball. They want to win on defense, and they want Aaron Rodgers to kind of be more of a caretaker quarterback type than being that, go out and sling it and go win an MVP, Aaron Rodgers. And so I think that he's certainly motivated, and that's exciting, but I think that it's okay to have a bad taste in your mouth from the play last year, because we've seen time and time again that when players' performance slips as they get older, it's hard to recover that from that. And then not having, again, I'm going to bang the drum on it, but if you're drafting a guy that's a borderline quarterback 1 and he doesn't have any sort of rushing floor at all, then you're just looking for passing volume. And so if you're just hunting high passing volume and you're not entirely sure the team even wants in the high passing volume, there's a tremendous amount of risk involved in that.
And I mean, we saw such different offenses in New York last year, too, depending on who the quarterback was. When Joe Flacco was under center, they were throwing the ball almost 60 times a game, and then they would have to water down the offense when Zach Wilson took over. So, again, kind of what we were talking about with Russell Wilson earlier, or Geno Smith earlier, is he going to be the guy in the first half of the season, second half of the season, or somewhere in between? Is this offense for New York? Is it going to be the Joe Flacco offense, the Zach Wilson offense, or somewhere in between? That's a question that we're not really going to get an answer to until we see it all on the field. So, yeah, I'm with you with Aaron Rodgers. The ceiling leaves a lot to be desired. Now, real quickly, if you're watching this show on YouTube, you can find a link in the description below for the podcast version of the show. We just cut out the best parts of the show and put them on YouTube. But if you want to hear some extra banter and some jokes and introductions and going back and forth and all that sort of stuff, be sure to find the link in the description below for the podcast. You can find that anywhere podcasts are found. Just search Dave Kluge, Footballguys, The Launchpad. You will be able to find it, I promise you. You can find that link in the description below. Now, Joey, let's go ahead and talk about your quarterback bust for the 2023 season.
Yeah, we were talking like a lot of these are just based on value and where they're going in drafts. And for me, it's Dak Prescott. He's going as the 11th quarterback off the board, 94th overall. That's saying he's going to finish as a QB1, and I just don't see that for Dak this year. We got Mike McCarthy taking over play calling duties, and he's been on record saying he wanted Kellen Moore to run the ball more. And I think that does play into McCarthy's coaching tendencies. And another part is that Dallas has one of the best defenses in the leagues. Last year, they led the league in takeaways, tied for fourth in interceptions. I could easily see Dallas finally just leaning on the run. I love Tony Pollard this year. I think he's going to take a lot of work away from Dak. Dak finished as the QB 16 in points per game last year and 19th at the position. Had career high in interceptions last year, and at double the rate of what he previously had in the past 4 seasons. Just everything is just kind of stacking up against Dak this year for me. And two of his best targets, Dalton Schultz and Noah Brown from last year, are now gone to Houston. They brought in Brandon Cooks, but I don't know how excited I get about Brandon Cooks at this point in his career. It's just a lot of arrows pointing down at Dak, and for me, I'm just not going to be drafting him.
Yeah, and just looking at Dak's career as a whole, I mean, he surprised so many people, and I think that there was this overcorrection in the market when he had his 2019 breakout season where he finished as the QB2 overall. And after that, everyone started saying Dak is a top 5 dynasty quarterback, and he was drafted next year. A lot of people were touting him as the overall quarterback 1 to be drafted off the board in 2020, but it's a completely different system. I mean, say what you want about Jason Garrett, but Jason Garrett let him throw the ball a ton, and that's what helped him hit that QB2 finish in 2019. Then he gets hurt in 2020, and we haven't really seen the rushing upside ever since then, and he's kind of been a back-end quarterback 1 ever since, kind of floats around that QB1, QB2 range. But I think a lot of people are still holding on to that hope that we saw from years ago, where they had a lot of really good pass catchers. They threw the ball a ton, and people haven't really adapted yet to see that this is a different offense than the offense we saw him thrive in years ago. Mm-hmm. So I'm with you, Joey. I want to disagree with you, but I'm completely with you on Dak Prescott. Jeff, do you have anything to add on the Cowboys?
It's just hard because when I look at personnel and what they're trying to do on personnel-wise, not having that hammer running back is where my real question is, because McCarthy can say they want to run the ball more, but if they don't have that physical guy inside to eat a lot of that volume, if Tony Pollard is the primary back and you've got some questions on who is behind him, if it's Malik Davis, which if you're playing in a deep dynasty league and he's available, grab Malik Davis for free off your waiver wire if you're able to, or Deuce Vaughn. Deuce Vaughn might play a little bit of a maybe questionable role. I know there was a story the other day that he had a great downfield catch over the shoulder, and so maybe they're using him as an offensive weapon potentially. But if you want to say that you're a team that wants to run the ball, they're going to play 11 personnel a lot. They're going to have one tight end, one running back a lot, because the addition of Brandon Cooks sets them up for that. And so you like to see that for Prescott, but again, not having that rushing floor anymore. And it's just, if you're going to tell me that you want to run the ball a lot, I would expect you to have players capable of running the ball a lot. And they just don't seem to have that structure right now.
Yeah, I mean, it really wouldn't surprise me. I was kind of cracking jokes about it earlier in the offseason, but now as we're getting to the point where they need to address that need, it wouldn't surprise me if Zeke comes back on more of a team-friendly deal. I mean, the main reason they cut him is because they couldn't afford that big, bulky contract, but it doesn't seem like any other teams are interested. Jerry Jones loves Zeke. If he's willing to come back on a cheaper deal, it wouldn't surprise me one bit if we're looking at the same RB1, RB2 duo there. So yeah, I think we're all kind of in agreement on what this Cowboys offense is going to look like and Dak Prescott. And that leaves me with my bust that I want to talk about. And again, like Joey mentioned, we're talking about bust relative to ADP. So I'm going to talk about Kirk Cousins, who's getting drafted right now as QB 13. I don't think that he's going to finish terribly. I don't think that he's going to get benched. I don't think that he's going to finish, as QB 30 or anything like that. He's probably going to finish pretty close to QB 13 where he's getting drafted. But Joey, we were talking about this a few days ago in a chat, and I think that you just nailed it. If you're looking to join a fantasy football league with your friends and compete, go right ahead and draft Kirk Cousins because you can plug him in every single week and you don't have to worry about him. But if you're trying to win that league, you don't want to draft Kirk Cousins because he just simply doesn't have that league-winning upside. I was looking through last year, and a lot of people just get enamored by his QB7 finish, QB6, depending on your scoring system. But really, he was a QB 13 in points per game. He was QB7 because he stayed healthy for the entire year, but on a per-game basis, he was outscored by Daniel Jones, Tua Tagovailoa, Geno Smith, who we talked about earlier, Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson, even Sam Howell in the one start that he had averaged more than Kirk Cousins did. He had 1 week that you would consider a week-winning week when he put up 34.4 points in Week 15 against Indianapolis, but outside of that, he was just kind of giving you performances in the high teens, occasionally he'd slip into the low 20s, and because he doesn't have any sort of rushing upside, he has no sort of safe floor. He had a few games where he had single-digit fantasy outputs, and he had 1 week that came at a very pivotal time in the season where he put up 2.2 points. So that lack of rushing upside just sets him up for such a dangerous floor. Looking at current ADP, I'd prefer Daniel Jones and Geno Smith straight up, who are getting drafted behind him because they're in better systems. Daniel Jones has the rushing upside. Aaron Rodgers, I kind of view him similarly to Kirk Cousins, but given the upside that we've seen from Rodgers in years past, I actually prefer him to Kirk Cousins. Even further down the list, I talked about Russell Wilson earlier, but also Jared Goff. I wouldn't prefer these guys outright to Kirk Cousins, but given the ADP costs, that they're a little bit cheaper, I would much prefer those guys. Kirk Cousins would just have to really slide for me to think about drafting him in a league anywhere. I mean, that's pretty much it. He's not giving you that elite upside. He was 7.2 points behind Patrick Mahomes last year. He was scoring about 5 points per game less than the elite tier of quarterbacks. He is a fine quarterback. He's a pretty good overall NFL quarterback. He's not going to hurt you that much in fantasy, but if you want to win your league, you're probably not going to do it with Kirk Cousins in your lineup. Jeff, I know you've got a pretty good take about Kirk Cousins from a few years ago. Why don't you tell us about your Kirk Cousins line?
Yeah, so the Kirk Cousins line. So basically the Kirk Cousins line is if your fantasy quarterback is better than Kirk Cousins, you feel good about the position. If it's Kirk Cousins or worse, you don't feel good about the position. And I tested it out, I teased it out, I wrote this article. I believe it was the summer of 2021, back in the archives of another fantasy website that you can go out and search around on Google a little bit, and you'll be able to find that there. But really looking at the numbers, and he really comes in as just like quarterback 12. It seems like year after year. And so, especially if you're in a superflex format, I really want two quarterbacks that are better than Kirk Cousins because that just gives you so much more upside to work with within the position. And so, if you're at Kirk Cousins' level, if your quarterback's better than Kirk Cousins, I don't think you need a second quarterback on your roster. If you're in a one quarterback, more shallow redraft league. If you're worse than Kirk Cousins, then you probably need a couple guys there to take a shot and see if somebody develops.
And Joey, I want to throw it to you now too, because we had a good conversation about Kirk Cousins a few days ago. And I think you said it best that if you are going to take Kirk Cousins, you also want to try to address that position later in the draft. So what are some players that you'd be looking at as like a QB2 if you are drafting Kirk Cousins?
So if you're drafting Kirk Cousins, I mean, I think he could be your QB2. Somebody I'm really high on this year, Anthony Richardson in a Superflex league. Kirk Cousins is kind of the perfect pair with him. Daniel Jones and Kirk Cousins, that's ugly to think about, but you would probably get somebody, a start like maybe Justin Jefferson and Christian McCaffrey. That can easily happen in a Superflex league if you get the end at the end of the turn. Things like that happening would be the only time I would want Cousins as like my QB2. As a QB1, go ahead.
Oh, no, go. You can finish the talk. I was just going to talk about. Go ahead.
No, like as a QB1, I would need to have somebody like Kyler Murray that I know is going to come back later in the year. Let's just get that Band-Aid on until Kyler gets back, and then I can start Kyler and let Kirk Cousins, He might be like that Phillip Rivers that has just a great start every season and then just tanks the rest of the year.
And I think, our friend Andrew Cooper over at Fantasy Alarm, he has trademarked the yin and yang draft strategy for tight ends. And last year was a perfect example of it working out, where you take a guy like Zach Ertz that probably isn't going to be hitting like an elite range of outcomes, but he's going to get steady volume and he's going to keep producing for you. But then you pair him up with a later guy like Greg Dulcich or Evan Ingram. And then over time, you kind of decide, whether it be on the waiver wire or the guy you drafted later, but you want to pair a safe option with an upside option. And, he trademarks this for tight ends, but I think it works great with quarterbacks as well. And if you're going to do that, a guy like Kirk Cousins is the perfect safe option. Like you said, Anthony Richardson, Trey Lance, Brock Purdy, who we talked about, maybe Sam Howell. So you take Kirk Cousins, and then he can kind of be the guy that'll get you through the early weeks, but then you hope to strike gold, because it seems like every year somebody pops up on waiver wires that we didn't expect. Last year was Brock Purdy. This year, who knows who it's going to be. But you draft Kirk Cousins, and then you take swings later in the draft, keep a close eye on waiver wire, and hope that you can pivot off of Kirk Cousins at a certain point in the season. But, if you're doing best ball or things like that where you can't run waivers, you're just stuck with Kirk Cousins for the rest of the year. Yeah. So this is a strategy that you can implement in redraft leagues, but just somebody that I really have no interest for at all when it comes to best ball. Well, that'll do it, guys. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
I just want to say real quick, if we're talking about best ball, and so we're utilizing underdog ADP, and here at Footballguys, we don't hate players, we hate ADPs. And so I'm curious, you guys, some game strategy, and I know Dave wrote the very good best ball guide that's available on Footballguys, but if we're using underdog ADP, and when I'm looking at some of these players that we're potentially fading, I see Aaron Rodgers tied to Garrett Wilson, and I see Kirk Cousins tied to Justin Jefferson, and I see Dak Prescott tied to CeeDee Lamb, and so their ADPs are sitting above guys that outperform them. And that in the other video, we talked about Russell Wilson. We talked about Geno Smith and Daniel Jones. Joey mentioned Daniel Jones. And so those ADPs are beating those guys, but those guys don't have elite options that they're tied to receiver wise. And so I'm curious if you guys think some of this ADP flushing out is people that are concerned about grabbing those stacks, pushing some of these lower players up the board a little bit to make sure that they lock that stack down. And if you think that strategy is really worth it, or if it's better to grab a quarterback that might have a little bit higher ceiling week to week and maybe grab a little bit of a cheaper stacking option with them and allow your elite wide receiver to be unstacked.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Jeff.
Yeah, we can call this like the reverse Gabe Davis effect, because we saw it last year with Gabe Davis on Underdog. Everyone was drafting Josh Allen in the second round, and then they wanted to stack him with somebody. Stephon Diggs was already off the board, so all of a sudden Gabe Davis creeps up draft boards until he's in the third round because everyone wanted that stack so badly. But then by the time redraft season rolls around and you're drafting on Sleeper with your buddies, Gabe Davis is falling into the 7th and 8th round because stacking isn't quite as important in redraft. I wrote an article on stacking that you can find at Footballguys. Just search Dave Kluge articles or find it at footballguys.com if you're unfamiliar with what we're talking about here. But basically what you do is you pair up a quarterback and a wide receiver, gives you a high-end range of outcomes every single week, and it's a strategy that best ballers do implement heavily. But you're right, you don't see it as much in redraft. So as we do get closer to redraft season and we start drafting these teams in August, you got to wonder if some of these other names start to creep up. Where people might not want Aaron Rodgers, they might not want Kirk Cousins, and they might just be willing straight up to take the risk on a guy like Russell Wilson, who we know has the elite upside, Jordan Love, who has some untapped potential that we haven't really seen yet. So we could see these ADPs shift a lot as the offseason goes on. I think that's a great point there, Jeff.
I think one player we mentioned today whose ADP I do think is going to rise is Aaron Rodgers, and that's just because of his name. I think as a lot more leagues start drafting, and I mean this, we have a lot of casual listeners here today. When people that are not playing in 35 leagues and starting in February, when they're doing their home leagues in August, you're going to see that name recognition with Aaron Rodgers. I know I have one of my guys in my league, Austin. I've been in a league with him for 12 years. He takes Aaron Rodgers every year, no matter what, because he loves Aaron Rodgers. And so I think you're going to see his name specifically shoot up draft boards.
Joey, I'm just laughing because I was about to tell a little story about my home league group chat, and Austin is probably going to end up listening to the show. I know he checks out the podcast, and he was beating the drum for Aaron Rodgers just a couple of days ago, saying, it's Aaron Rodgers. What are you talking about? He just won the MVP 2 years ago. And us nerds, we watch the game and we look at the analytics, and we can see that Aaron Rodgers is falling off the age curve aggressively. I mean, all of the underlying peripherals last year were abysmal, but yeah, you're right on. The Austins in your league are still going going to draft Aaron Rodgers.
Is your Austin a Jaguars fan? Because I feel like the reason he always took Aaron Rodgers is because the Jaguars, really outside of that one Blake Bortles year, never had a good quarterback. And now they've got Trevor, so he's got someone to draft.
Well, he is a Colts fan, so he's probably
Okay,
going to be
all
pairing up Aaron Rodgers with Anthony Richardson at some point. But that's
the AR
funny.
duo. Look at that.
Jeff,
here at Football Guys,
before we sign off, tell us about your Austin.
I was just going to say that there are no casuals. There's just degenerates. So.
Yes.
Especially if you're listening to a fantasy football podcast in May, you're probably not a casual. But the nice thing about this episode is that it'll hopefully be somewhat evergreen, at least for this season. Hopefully come, July or August, when people are starting to brush up, they can look back and they can listen to what we have said about these guys today and apply it to their fantasy drafts. But before we sign off, Jeff, one more time, let everyone know where they can find you on social media.
Yeah, you can find me with Twitter at @4whomjbelltolls, the number 4, and then you can find me with Football Guys. You can find me with the Debbie Royale Patreon. Just check out all those avenues. Primarily, content is going to be coming through Football Guys. We have the Football Guys College Football Show. Please check that out. Download. Check out the YouTube. Anywhere podcasts can be found. And right now, we are very dynasty focused on that show. So if you're a dynasty player and you're looking for some content to help your dynasty league, while the name might say Football Guys College Football Show, in the offseason we turned it into a dynasty show. So make sure to check that out and our Spotlight series as well and all the great content at Football Guys. And again, if you've got questions, if you've got things that you want to see in Dynasty, if you want to see Football Guys do something, please reach out to me and I'm happy to try to help and get those things prepared and produced.
Yeah, if there's one similarity between the three of us outside of the sarcasm and humor that you're going to get on Twitter, it's that we all want to help people out. We all are willing to help you out, so feel free to add us on Twitter, shoot us an email, a DM, whatever it may be. We love those one-on-one connections and helping people out. So, Joey, let everyone know where they can find you on Twitter, and also give your personal phone number out so people can just call you directly with their fantasy questions.
Yeah. No, listen, I'm the guy that I respond to the robots because no one will talk to me. No, I'm kidding. So, no, at the Joey Wright, DMs are open. Any fantasy questions, anything you're looking for this year you think I can help with, be glad to help. You can find me here at Football Guys on the Pretend GM show with Alfredo Brown. I'll be here the next 3 weeks. I think I'm just going to stay in this room until Dave calls me every day. Also, Front Yard Fantasy every day at 3 o'clock. And also, actually, tonight, people won't be listening tonight, but on Friday nights at 9:30, we're starting a mock draft show until the start of the season. So Friday night mocks will be going on every Friday night. Yep.
Awesome. Well, I will definitely check that out tonight, or if you're listening to this in a couple days, a few days ago. But check it out next week, every Friday night. Yeah. Of course, I'm Dave Kluge. You can find me on Twitter at Dave Kluge. You can find all of my written and video content here at Football Guys. YouTube.com/FootballGuys, FootballGuys.com, FootballGuys.com/Rookie Guide, FootballGuys.com/Best Ball Guide. All the good stuff that we got coming at you this offseason. Thank you so much for tuning in, and all three of us will see you next week. Thank you for tuning in. On the right side of your screen, you're going to see some videos that we have on the Football Guys YouTube page that you need to check out. We're bringing you content every single day here at youtube.com/footballguys. So be sure to subscribe so you can check all of that out as it becomes available. If you haven't already, give us a thumbs up on this video because it's going to help some other people find it. Thank you so much for tuning in.